Good evening, everyone. I'm Professor Daniel Chua. I'm a Director of Faith and Global Engagement, and a very warm welcome to the University of Hong Kong. Now, this is our fourth McDonald Faith and Global Engagement Distinguished Lecture. It's the last of the season. And I thought we'd do something slightly different to begin with, something more interactive. So what I want you to do is to hold out your hand like this. Please, that's right. So this means like, right? And this means don't like, right? Or this means yes, and this means no. And I'll ask you a series of questions. Okay, are you ready? Okay, so put your hand like this first, okay? On neutral. All right. So here we go. Do you like me? Be careful. Oh, man. How can you remain neutral? Okay, right. What about this one? Do you like your smartphone? Ooh, interesting. Right, okay. Are you on Facebook? Yeah, most of you. Some of you don't. Okay. Are you on Twitter? Oh, Instagram. Oh, okay. Would you like me to stop asking these inane questions? 100%. Very good. All right. So, as you know, we're all connected, actually, to social media. Even though some of you don't have one or the other thing, we're all connected in some way. And the question this evening is social media sociable? Is social media sociable? Excuse me. So, sorry. Or does social media alienate us? So it's WhatsApp. My wife tells me that if you get a WhatsApp, you have to answer immediately. That's the etiquette for WhatsApp. Okay. So do I want to have chicken or beef for dinner tonight? Okay. Chicken or beef? Okay. It's chicken tonight. Okay. Thank you. All right. So the social media. What's that saying? Does it bind us together, or does it actually alienate us? What about our smartphones? Does it connect us, or does it actually drive a wedge between us? Does it actually alienate us from, hello? Hello? Really? Yeah, okay. Yeah, all right, I'll tell them. All right, thanks. I can actually use it right now. Yeah. Okay, all right, thanks, bye. Yeah, that was my team from Faith and Global Engagement saying, I forgot to tell you to switch off your mobile phones. So please switch off your mobile phones. Now, also, the other thing about this evening is that being Faith and Global Engagement, we're not just going to give you a lecture, right, on social media. We have actually found something that is very rare. In fact, it's so rare, I was very surprised that we could even find this thing, but we're going to present it to you this evening. And this rare thing is a human being that does not have a smartphone. Can you believe that? A human that does not actually have a smartphone. And do you know who that is? It is our speaker for tonight. She does not have a smartphone. In fact, the fact that she's even here this evening all the way from New York is a miracle that we actually get her to come here, right? We had to communicate with you by Morse code or something. I can't remember what we did. Yeah, we're very glad you're here. Anyway, but our speaker, Donna Freitas, is here this evening without a smartphone, partly because I think she is in many ways like a smartphone. She is not just smart, but she can multitask and do a lot of things that, well, actually academics don't do that well. I mean, she puts it all together. Now, like me, she's an academic. She started out in religious studies. But unlike me, the books that she writes are actually popular. People actually buy her books. It's amazing. And and unlike me, they actually are very relevant, particularly to young people, particularly in college age. She's written books not just on social media, but also on sex and the soul. That is about sex and religion on American campuses. And she's also just written a book on consent on campus as well. And you can be able to hear her speak on these topics as well later during the week. So she writes these books, and people buy them, and they're really popular, and she can make money doing this. And she also writes fiction as well. And she's very good at it as well. So now, unlike me, she doesn't have to be an academic. She can actually be a full-time writer. Now, she still teaches, but she's not teaching religious studies at the moment. She's teaching creative writing in New York. So you can see she's pretty much like a smartphone. She can do all these different things at once. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our smartphone-less Donna Freitas. Welcome. Yes.
I was going to tell you this later on in my talk, but now you all know I don't have a smartphone, and I'm also not on social media. And it used to be a non-conscious choice, but in the last, I don't know, I guess 7 or 8 years, it's become a choice that I've made. And so I do get worried that at some point in my life, I am not gonna be able, I'm not gonna be able to get on a plane without a smartphone, but we're not there yet. So until then, I will not have one. Anyway, all right, well, now that we've gotten the confession out of the way, I was gonna ask you, Daniel also stole this, but I was gonna ask you to, I was gonna challenge you to stay off your phones for this talk. So if you haven't already shut off your phone, does it have an off button? Can you shut it off? So then I would just challenge you to do that for the duration of what we're going to do here tonight. So let's see. So this is the book that's based on my study, and so basically what happened when I set out to do this research was I was just going to do research about social media and smartphones and college students in the United States. And what I didn't know was that all of our conversations were going to become about happiness. So I didn't set out to do a study about college students, social media, smartphones, and happiness. But the thing was, it didn't matter what I asked the students that I was interviewing, that I was surveying, they kept talking about happiness in their answers. And so it just kept coming up again and again. And so that's how it became such a central part of my research. So I'm going to come back to the happiness thing in a little bit, but I want you guys to think a little bit about some questions as I talk about this research this evening. And so one of the big ones, I think, one of the biggest ones for all of us right now is, what does it mean to have a healthy relationship with social media and with our smartphones? Has anyone here in this audience asked themselves that before? Have you asked yourself, what does it mean to have a healthy relationship? Now everybody's like, I did, I ask all the time. I ask myself about this. Well, so if you haven't asked it before, I think it is one of the most important questions we need to ask ourselves today, because our devices, because social media have become so ubiquitous in our lives. And even just, when just walking around in Hong Kong, in the last few days, being a tourist, I'm a sightseer, because I don't have a smartphone, I don't have anything to look at when I'm walking around, except my map. I look at my map because sometimes I'm lost. But it has been, people walk around with their phones here like this. It's not that they don't do that in New York, but I have to say, here, they do it more than in New York. And especially also at restaurants, I noticed, because I've been going to all these restaurants by myself, and I bring a book, and I actually have a book because I can't read on my phone, and or I have a newspaper. Today people were looking at me. I have my remnants of the New York Times from last week that I brought on the plane, and I've been carrying them around in my bag. So I took them out at my table, and I was holding up the newspaper, and I realized that there was a whole bunch of people on the table next to me, and they were watching me with my newspaper. And I was like, look, it's a newspaper, they still exist. So, but one of the things that's been interesting is how many people are sitting at the table, with other people, like friends or their partners, maybe their husbands, their kids, and every single person at the table is on a phone. And which is fine, not to judge, but I do think that's one of the reasons why we need to be asking these questions. So what does it mean? What does it mean to have a healthy relationship with these things? And the reason why I think it's important to ask that question is because I think so many of us have unhealthy relationships with our devices. And, and part of why I don't have a smartphone is because I'm thinking about my health, because I know myself. And I don't have a smartphone, but I have a laptop. And one of the things, this is another confession. I'm confessing so many things already. And I'm a writer, as Daniel mentioned in the introduction, and this is how I get my writing done. I get up in the morning, and I get up really early. I'm an early riser, and I have to, like, there's like an obstacle course that I have to go through in my house. Like, I have to go into this office and I have to go on these boxes, and I physically unplug the Wi-Fi from the wall, because if I don't, I can't write my books. Because if I don't physically unplug the Wi-Fi from the wall, I will be online shopping. I love looking at other, like, houses in my fantasy I'm gonna buy. Like, oh, look at that nice beach house. Like, look at that nice beach house. Oh, look at this nice beach house over here on Zillow. We have this thing called Zillow, which has all these houses. And I can spend like 3 hours on Zillow instead of writing my books. So because I know myself, because I know how tempted I get to, or like to read the news, or to look at all the nice spring dresses that have just come out, and I like to look at the runways when they have all the fashion shows. That's what I will do instead of writing my books. So I have to. This is how I cope. I unplug the Wi-Fi from the wall, and everyone always tells me things like, oh, you can just turn off the airport, on your laptop. And I'm like, well, yeah, but then I could just put it back on. And so I need to like be physically like in my chair. Like I have to like go across the house and go around boxes to plug it back in. Like I have to have stuff between me and all those things that I'm tempted to do. So this is part of me maintaining a healthy relationship with my devices. I have tricks that I've learned to cope, but also I choose not to have a smartphone because I know myself. And I know that if I had one, I'd be on it all the time instead of doing things like, looking at the nice tall buildings, or sitting and reading my paper on actual paper, when I'm out to eat. So I want you, as I'm talking, and as we do the Q&A, I want you to think about this question. If you've never asked it of yourself before, I want you to ask it. I want you to think about, what would it look like? Like, what would a healthy relationship look like for you? What sorts of skills might you need to develop in order to have that healthy relationship? What sorts of things might you need to do in your life to create a healthy relationship if you don't already have one? Do you need to go unplug the Wi-Fi? And I mean, I know that doesn't work if you have a smartphone now, because, you can just connect to whatever's up there that, I don't know, like people have unlimited data now. So, but what are the sorts of things that you need to do or that you could do in your life to give yourself more of a balance? And I'm going to talk tonight about the results from my survey with American college students, and one of the things I want you to think about is, do they sound at all like, people here in Hong Kong, or students here at Hong Kong University? Or do they sound very different from all of you? Are some of their concerns very different? So anyway, hold those questions in your head. Maybe if you had your smartphone on, you could tweet it, or you could write it down, but you can't because you turned it off. On your honor. So I already gave you my confession. Daniel stole it. I gave you lots of confessions, including about my Wi-Fi needs in the morning. So just to give you a sense of the basics of the study, so I did a national survey about social media, smartphones, and college life. I was interested in how does social media affect relationships? What do people think of their smartphones? It was a very, very broad-based study. So I went to 13 colleges and universities. I went to a series of different college types because I was interested in, if I went to a religiously affiliated college, would student attitudes be different than at like a secular college? Would usage be different, et cetera? So I went to a range of colleges and universities. I went to colleges in cities. I went to colleges in rural areas. I went to some of the like top universities in the United States, and some that don't even make it into the rankings. So like just really a great diversity of schools. I did 183 interviews, one-on-one interviews with students. And then I did, almost 900 online surveys. And so the interviews I did in person, they lasted anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. All the students for the interviews were randomly sampled. So that means that, random sampling is good, because then that means your study results are more significant than, let's say, if I came to Hong Kong University and I was doing my study and I said, can I have a bunch of volunteers who want to participate in a study on social media? And, you 10 of you here were like, I want to do it, I'm really interested in social media. And so then all of my results would be biased because I got the 10 people at the university who are dying to talk about social media. But I did random sampling at these universities, which means I got a list generally of 20 to 25 students from the university that they just randomly generated, which you can do now with technology, so that's nice. It used to be really hard to do random sampling for surveys. It used to be very expensive, but now you can do it for free. And they gave me the list, and I would start with number 1. And I would get in touch with these students, and I would be like, please do my survey, please, please, please. And so I would try to get them to come and do the interview. And my goal was not to go above asking 20 students, because I wanted to pretty much get every single student that I asked to come do the survey so that the data would be in really good shape. So, and with the online survey, which was all essays, basically, so students wrote essays on things, those were volunteers. So these were students who volunteered, and it would go out at their university, and they could do this if they wanted. So that's a different sort of set of data. So, okay. So I want to talk about why is the book called The Happiness Effect? Like, why is it even about happiness? So I mentioned earlier that, I just set out to just basically talk to college students about, so what's going on with all of this? Like, what do you guys think of social media and your smartphones? How's it affecting you? Like, do you like it? Like, just ask general questions. How is it changing the experience of college? And one of the things I found out very quickly was I could pretty much ask about anything, and students would talk about happiness and their answers, but they did it in a way that was really striking to me. And so, when you're doing this sort of research, like I would interview a student, and then I would take notes after, and like you start to realize as you're meeting one student after the other, what the themes are, like what keeps coming up that people talk about. You start hearing similarities between what people are saying, even though you're talking to this whole range of people, like, from a particular university or in multiple universities. And I kept hearing something like, this was like a complaint students kept making. So I would ask them all kinds of questions, and they kept saying, well, on social media, you have to put on a happy face. You have to appear happy. Everybody's just like, oh, look at me, I'm so amazing. And then they would say, but that has nothing to do with like real happiness. Like real happiness is something different. And so students kept talking about how because of social media today, we are really worried about appearing happy all the time. And so that was the thing that kept coming up. Social media is about appearing happy, appearing happy, appearing happy. And I literally had students, I had a bunch of students, they would make funny faces, and they'd be sarcastic. They were really sort of annoyed. This was not something they were happy about. This was something they were annoyed about. They were annoyed about the happiness expectation on social media. So they would say, if like anything that you post, it has to reflect really well on you. Like you have to appear like you are super, super happy. And even if you're crying when you post it. So students would say something like that often. They'd say like, oh, like my roommate, she'll have the worst day and she'll be super depressed, but then she's posting all of these photos of herself where she's like jumping up and down and she's in her favorite outfit and she looks so amazing, but I know that she's really upset. So there was this big difference between this sense of like online we appear happy, but that has nothing to do with real happiness or how we actually feel or whether or not we feel happy. But then the happiness effect, this is what I started thinking about, or that I started thinking, oh, this is the effect of all this happiness. So students talked about the experience of being forced to witness so much happiness all of the time. Because students, everyone's on their phones all the time, right? So everybody's on their phone scrolling, and they're on social media all the time. And they talked about how everything they're seeing is everybody's best successes, like everybody's happiest moments, everybody's best photos. And you're just you when you're sitting there. And maybe you are crying. And what you're seeing, though, is everybody being so happy all of the time. And that makes you feel bad. So the happiness effect is seeing everyone appear so happy all the time actually makes us pretty sad or pretty anxious or pretty upset about ourselves. It makes us feel bad about ourselves. So much happiness equals sadness or ambivalence or distress in ourselves. So one of the students that I interviewed, when my editor saw this, he was like, "This sounds horrible." So do they have high school reunions here? Do you guys have high school reunions? They're in the movies a lot, you know, like they're kind of like a joke at home. It's like when you go back to your high school reunion, you hopefully have done something really amazing, you know, so then you can be like, "Oh, look at me, I've turned out well." And so a lot of people talk about how they don't want to go to their high school reunion if things aren't going well because they don't want to be judged by their classmates. So this young woman, Brandy, said, you know, so being online, being on social media, it's kind of like how everybody says with their high school reunion. They want to go back and show off how great their life is. It's like that now, but you don't have to wait for your 10-year reunion. It's like that every day. So a lot of like older people, when they see that, like parental people, are like, "Oh, that sounds horrible." So anyway, so being on social media is like going to or having to go to your high school reunion every day. And then this is another one of my favorite comments. So I got all kinds of comments like this from students. It's like a happiness competition. That sounds like so much fun. Which is funny because I think if you're really happy, you don't feel the need to show other people that you're having a good time. So a happiness competition. So a lot of students talk too about how social media is a popularity contest. It's a contest. I kept hearing the word contest. And it's the place where you show off all of your success all the time. So the other thing that came up, which was related, was, and I'm curious to know if this is true here in Hong Kong. This was such a huge theme throughout the study, was the influence or the impact of the professionalization of Facebook. So I interviewed this young man, and he told me that the world we live in now is a lot more dangerous, especially with social media. And he meant dangerous to our reputations. And so this was a young man who was, he was in student government, and he was interested in being in politics in the future. And he talked about how he had to have this immaculate social media presence. And he used words like pure, immaculate, spotless. That was his favorite one. He kept saying spotless. And he told me that he learned that starting in middle school because he was in student government in middle school, and the advisor to student government was teaching all of these young aspiring politicians that their social media presence was really, they had to be very careful. Of course, this was before Donald Trump, so I don't know what's changed since then, but his social media presence is certainly not immaculate. So Amir was talking about how he constantly had to think about every word that was going out there, because you never know what's going to come back to haunt you later in life. So you had to be very, very careful. And he was one of the students. Lots of students told me about this, but this was like a universal thing in the United States. They talked about Facebook cleanups. Has anybody heard of a Facebook cleanup? Raise your hand if you've heard of a Facebook cleanup. Raise your hand if you've done a Facebook cleanup or an Instagram cleanup. So basically what that is you go back into your profile and you erase anything that you think might be offending to someone else. So, I'm going the wrong way. So this is partly why people are so worried about their Facebook presence. So I'll read a quote from Branson. So he says, "I've heard a lot about being professional and trying to avoid any pictures that may jeopardize obtaining a job. Since I am a college student in a global economy along with a recession, I am well aware of the little details and how they can be a deal breaker for my post-college life. And then we had, I'll save this one for next. So I had student after student who was hyper aware that one comment on Twitter or Facebook could cost them a job in the future. And in particular, there were two things that students talked about that were no-nos on Facebook especially, because they think of, at least in the United States, students think of Facebook as your online CV. They actually talked about it. It's your online CV, and you have to carefully curate it. I'll talk about that in a minute. But you want to, like, you have to have the Facebook page. A lot of students hate Facebook in the US. They think of it as homework now. It's literally, it's like their professional presence online for future interviewers and for grandma, more or less, because grandma's probably on Facebook. But they're very concerned with not offending any future interviewers because the job market is really tight, it's very competitive. And they were worried about two different things. They felt like religion is a no-no to post about because you never know who you're gonna offend with what you say. Like, you don't wanna be too upfront about it. But more than that, politics was a no-no. You did not wanna reveal if you were a Democrat or a Republican, because what if the person interviewing you when you were going up for jobs was a Republican and you're a Democrat and it's on your Facebook page? And then what if another candidate who's just as good as you are, you know, is a Republican and they're interviewing with a Republican interviewer and the Republican interviewer knows that too? The Republican's gonna get the job, you're not. And so you had to make sure to try to erase any sort of quality about yourself that might hurt your job prospects. And one of the things I thought was really interesting was that a lot of universities were teaching students to do this, actually. And they were teaching students how to be appropriate online, which maybe sounds like a good idea, right? But the effect of it can be kind of poisonous or toxic, because when you think about it, social media, you're supposed to be able to be social on it, except what students have learned is that this is a place where I perform myself for other people so that maybe I will get a job. And I wonder, so I did this research just before the US election, and I do wonder if students, because I don't know if you followed our politics in the last couple of years, but it's been pretty contentious. And people have really been online talking about politics in a way that they were not prior to this election. And I wonder if students lifted their rule about no politics on social media because our dialogue has gotten so politicized. But I would guess, if I had to make a guess, students who are applying for jobs, like students who are juniors or seniors in college, so then they're getting close to graduating, my guess would be if they did post about politics, if they have posted about it, before they go on the job market, they'll go back and they'll curate, they'll erase, they'll do their Facebook cleanup to make sure that all evidence of their politics is gone, because they are so worried about it affecting them getting a job. And that brings me to Annika, who was the first person who said something like this, but not the last. So she told me in our interview, "You are a brand and social media is the platform on which we project our brand to the world." And so she said that, and I was like, I'm a brand, really? So how many people here have learned about branding themselves on social media, like actually using that word? So, you know, and I had another student who told me, like, you're a brand like Kellogg's or GE, and I was like, I'm a brand like Kellogg's? I'm like a cereal box, or I'm like cereal. And so students are learning, this is part of the professionalization of social media, students are learning that, you know, this is your face to the world, this is how you promote yourself, and so you have to think of yourself as a brand. And so one of the things that students are learning in college, but just in our culture now, is to think of themselves as brands, as products in many ways, that you are thinking about marketing to an audience. Which brings me to what I started calling the 3 C's of social media. So I kept hearing these words all the time from students: craft, curate, and cultivate. You have to craft your posts. You have to curate an audience or audiences, depending on the platform. You have to cultivate a certain image. And so I kept hearing these words over and over again. This has to do with branding. This has to do with the professionalization of Facebook. And so if you think about these things and go back to the happiness part, right? So people are very cognizant of how they're appearing to other people online. They're actually, I had students tell me that it will take them sometimes 2 hours to craft a single post. So they would say things like, I only do it like once a week because it's so much work. And so people talked about posting as like homework, like, oh, it's like actually I had students who told me it was like another job. It was like a job they felt like they had. And students told me also that, they felt obliged to post, that they have to have a certain presence because people start feeling suspicious of you now. They must be very suspicious of me. People feel suspicious of you if you don't have Facebook, if you don't have Instagram. People assume that means you're hiding something. And so if you're going up for a job, right, if you're going to interviews, you don't want your interviewers not to find anything about you, because that would be bad, because then you have secrets. So you want them to find just the right thing, so then they give you the job. So there's all this sense of I have to craft a certain image. And so if you think about the idea that social media is work, social media is about performing a certain side of you, but that's not really you. And it doesn't sound very social, right? It's not sounding very social. And so that's part of where people feel exhausted by this. People feel exhausted by the expectation. A lot of students felt really resentful of the expectation, but they also, at the same time, were going online all the time and seeing everybody's crafted, curated, cultivated images and then feeling sad about themselves. So, I had a student too who told me, so I mentioned Amir he told me all the time, he told me like 3 or 4 times that he needed to maintain a spotless image on social media. And I had a young woman who told me now that there's such a thing called the reputation self. The reputation self is literally like, it's the thing you try to preserve online. So everyone knows now it's really easy to mess up your reputation, right? Because one comment, if it goes viral, or if you make just the wrong comment, we're not easily forgiving in our culture anymore. And so with one comment, you could ruin your reputation forever. And so you have to think about the reputation self. So I wanted to talk about Emma, who made this comment. So Emma she was a really interesting interviewee. So she went to, I don't know how much you know about universities in the United States, but certain universities in the United States they're like really big football schools, and they have sororities and fraternities, and their schools just like live and die upon Greek life, so like fraternities and sororities. And this young woman, Emma, she was an honors college student, but she was the vice president of the most popular sorority on campus. And so Emma was like, here's the popularity totem pole at her university. Her university was like a 40,000 person university. And so she's like, the number 2 woman on campus in terms of like, everyone envies Emma. And I called her Emma because, they're all pseudonyms, but I called her Emma because she actually looked like Emma Stone. And so when she came into the interview room, I was like, oh wow, it's Emma Stone. And she was like head to toe. It was a Saturday morning at 9 a.m. And outside the interview room, I was in like the student center, and they were preparing for homecoming. I don't know how much you know about American culture, but it was like a big football school, and they were making floats. Like all the sororities and the fraternities were making floats. So to get to the interview room, I was like going around all this paper mache and all sorts. So they were getting ready for a big parade. And so Emma showed up at 9 a.m. with her hair in a ponytail and like her sorority gear, like head to toe. And she proceeded to tell me how social, she had very intense feelings about social media. And she was talking about how it affected sorority life in the United States, or like in her experience. And she would say how like nobody's having any fun. Like everything's about getting pictures. And so like we'll have a party at our sorority, and we'll spend 2 hours the sorority sisters will spend 2 hours taking 300 to 400 pictures to get just one image they could put up on their sorority's Facebook page. So she said, she was like, we're all smiling and like super happy in the photo. She was like, but all of us are getting in fights with each other, and we're all tired, and we're really angry at each other in between all the photos that they're taking. But then we smile for the camera. So she was feeling frustrated with social media. But the reason why I tell you that she was like #2 young woman on campus, and she happened to be beautiful. She looked like Emma Stone, is because she felt really terrible about herself all of the time because of social media. And she said, she articulated something really succinctly that I heard so many students say something like, but not quite so directly as Emma. So she told me during the interview, she was like, social media is fake, social media is fake. It's everybody just pretending to be amazing when really they're all like not so amazing or not so happy. And so she was talking about the experience of having to go online all the time and see everybody's amazing photos and everybody's like super smiling faces and everybody's like amazing jobs they just got and everybody's amazing letters of acceptance wherever they were gonna, go or whatever they were doing. And so she said going online for her was like the worst version of me versus the best version of everybody else. So she was like, when I go online, I'm just me. Like, I'm just me in my sweatpants looking like Emma Stone. But anyway, I'm just me, and maybe I've had a bad day, or maybe I'm feeling lonely. And what do I see when I go online? I see all of everybody's happiness, just reams of it, just over and over again, happy, 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 happy. And the more I see it, the more I feel terrible about myself. And she was like, and even though I know it's all fake, even though I know everybody's all like performing, because I do it too, I perform when I'm on social media, it's still, knowing that is still not enough to stop me from feeling bad. And so she was talking about this tension that I heard from so many students. And then I want to mention Rob. Rob was interesting. We don't have to read all of his quotes, but Rob was obsessed with likes. So this was Daniel did, we liked Daniel, at the beginning of this. So a lot of the students talked a lot about likes. I asked them all, like, so do you care about likes? And a lot of people, the answer was, I don't care about them. Like, nobody wanted to care about them, but then over the course of the interview, they would admit, like, yeah, I do actually care about them. I care how many likes I get, or how many retweets, etc. So, but Rob talked about him for the entire interview. He kept coming back to it, even though he really didn't want to care about them. So he said, if 100 people like my anonymous tweet, about the food at my school, then I'll be like, oh wow, people like or agree with me, or they think I'm cool. Like if I were to do this in real life, they'd like me. Subconsciously, you're just looking for likes because likes have a monetary value. It seems, even though they don't, it just seems like the more likes you get, the better you feel. So he was going like back and forth in his feelings about like. And he says, he was telling me his theory about how to get likes. So if you post a funny joke that people can relate to, then it gets a lot of likes. But if you post an inside joke, nobody will get it. Nobody will like it. You have to really feed into your audience. So it's kind of like a big game, like a big pointless game. So he's telling me, one of the things I heard too from students was they would tell me about high traffic times. So do you know about high traffic times? So, which were generally at universities, high traffic times are from 4 to 5 p.m. or 9 p.m. And that's when so they would tell me, this was their plan. If you're gonna put up a new profile picture, you wanna put it up in a high traffic time because you wanna get a lot of likes on it because it's a new profile picture and you've probably just taken 350 selfies in order to get the new profile picture. And so, and I had students who were like, oh yeah, I don't leave a photo up if it doesn't have more than 100 likes or 300 likes or whatever. And so they would tell me yeah, you got to post it at 4:30 because that's when everybody's online and that's where you're gonna get the most likes. And then if you get the certain amount of likes you're looking for, then you can leave the profile picture up. But if you don't get enough, then it's embarrassing. You have to take it down. And then I had students who were like, yes, sometimes you can trick Facebook and you can repost it and then get even more likes. So you can put it up there at 4:30 and then repost it at 9 and then you double your likes. And so they had all these theories about this. And one of the things that Rob said was he felt like social media was really unfair to men because girls just get more likes naturally. So this is what he said. He said, just so you know, ladies, a girl posts a random picture in her room laying down on a bed and it gets 100 likes. I think it's interesting that some girls don't even need to try just because they're female. And then he said he was like, I can lay on my bed and take a picture. I'm amazing. So he actually did that in the interview. And one of the things he was telling me was, he was like, I could be hanging off a cliff by one hand and I'll get like 20 likes. And a girl can just be sitting on her bed and she gets 200. It's not fair. So he felt like that was very unfair. So I heard this from a number of people, that girls get more likes online and that this isn't fair, but Rob was the one who said it most succinctly, and he felt very offended by it. So 73% of students in the online survey said, I try always to appear happy or positive with anything attached to my real name. And I want you to focus on the real name part, because this is one of the things that was interesting. So you have to be happy, you have to appear successful and popular if the account you're using is attached to your real name. You can only be real if you're using a pseudonym. You can only be sad, you can only be silly if you're using a pseudonym, because the things that are attached to your real name are Googleable, and they can affect your college experience, like what your professors think of you, but most of all, they can affect your future interviewers. And so people were very aware of anything associated with their real name, and they felt like the only way you can truly be honest online is if you create an account that is not attached to you, so that where you make up a name. So I started, you guys have CNN here, right? It's on my TV in the hotel, but I don't know if it's just because in the hotel. So in the United States, CNN is like the 24-hour, it was like the original 24-hour news channel. And I've started to think of social media as like the CNN of envy. So it's like the 24-hour news, like the ticker tape that's constantly showing you everybody's best. And kind of like what Emma was saying, you know, when she goes online and she starts scrolling, she's going through like that ticker tape, she sees all this amazing stuff, but she's just still, you know, this real person who isn't always feeling happy when she goes online. So now I want to talk about smartphones. So which are basically our social media delivery devices now. So unlike me, who uses my laptop, most people use their smartphone now to access social media. And I talked to everybody in the study about their smartphones, and it was really fascinating to talk to people about their smartphones, and funny too. So in the chapter in the book where I wrote about them, I think it's called I love you, I hate you. And students would they talked about how much they loved their smartphones, and then in the next breath they said, and I also hate it. So people loved their smartphones and people hated their smartphones. I had people who named their smartphones. So I had this one young woman whose smartphone was named Meg. And she was like, me and Meg, we go everywhere together. She literally said that. And I said, like, me and Meg, we go everywhere together. Meg and I are close. So she talked about, you know, Meg, like her partner. Does anyone have a name for their smartphone here? No one wants to admit it. So, but I had a number of students who had names, and it was funny. Like, it was a fun part of the conversation. I had a young man who told me that going out of the house without his smartphone was like leaving the house without his heart or his brain. And I was like, wow, that's intense. So apparently I'm always leaving without my heart and my brain. I had another young man, both young men. He was dressed he was wearing this like really nice suit. He was a very good dresser. And he told me that he loved his smartphone because he loved to see himself. And he said he would like walk around and be like, oh, I look good today. And so like, oh, look at me. I'm, you know, like, oh, I like my suit. So so there were people who like really like had intense feelings about their smartphones. But then at the same time, they also felt really stressed and angry at them. And I had students who, you know, had all kinds of tricks that they use to help them navigate their smartphone or to not use it as much, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. So one of the reasons why students felt really stressed about their smartphones or felt really complicated about their smartphones was, so 69% of students said that they believe that smartphones have created the expectation that we must be on and available, immediately available, both day and night, and even while we are sleeping. So students talked about how they feel like they can never turn off their phones. They talked about how it's like we're all like brain or heart surgeons, like we're on call, like surgeons. And a lot of students, FYI, blamed their parents for this because they were like, well, my mom, she gets so mad at me if I don't respond within like 2 minutes. And so I could never not have a smartphone because my mother would let me. So some students blamed their parents for this. So if any of you are, expecting or parents here, if you're expecting your kid to respond to you immediately, you are feeding their need for the smartphone. So, but students talked about how they felt like they literally had to leave it on all night. I had a conversation, not for the study, but just when I was doing a visit for a lecture with a group of students. They were on student government, and they were having a conversation with me about a different part of my research. And one of them had his smartphone out on the table, and he announced ahead of time. He was like, "I know I'm being rude, but I'm waiting to hear about an internship, and so I have to have this with me." And so I was like, "That's fine." And then I was like, "But you could just call them back later if you hear." And he's like, "Well, no, I couldn't." And I was like, "Why not?" And he said, "Well, because they would give the job away to someone else." And I was like, "We're only gonna be here for 30 minutes." And he was like, "But I think if I don't respond immediately that they're gonna give the job to someone else." And I was like, "Do you really want a job if they don't give you 30 minutes to give back to them?" And so we had this whole conversation where I was like, he basically expressed that he felt like today the job market is so competitive that if you do not respond immediately to an offer, they will give it away to the next person. And I thought, really? Is that really? And then I said, "Well, do you want that job?" And I was like, "Maybe you want a different job." And so there was a sense of, we have to always, always, always be on. And this is intense. This is difficult. So some people, they sort of liked the immediacy of the idea that you could say something to someone and they respond immediately, like you get immediate satisfaction. But then they also really resented the fact that you have to be on all the time. So, so this gets us to the conversation about coping. So people have a love-hate relationship with social media. People have a love-hate relationship with their smartphones. And we had these really funny conversations about this. So what I didn't expect when I set out to do this research was how many students were gonna tell me about an experience. So I didn't even ask about this, but I had so many students who just offered experiences where they talked about the joy of when someone takes away their phone. So it came up, students would tell me at one school I was interviewing students right after spring break. So they just had a week off, and so many of them had gone somewhere with their families, on a vacation, or they went and did volunteer work somewhere. And either their phone didn't work because they were on a boat, or they were in some sort of country where they just didn't have reception, or their parents took it away from them or said you can't use your phone because it's going to be too expensive for you to use it. So they took away the smartphone. And so they talked about how the first 3 days were hell, that this was really traumatizing for them, that they were suddenly separated from their smartphones. But then they talked about how suddenly there was this moment when everything got so calm and they felt they could just, enjoy their vacation or look at the stars. And they were talked about, especially students who went on group trips, to volunteer somewhere, they talked about how everyone was so much more social without their smartphones, how they got to know people on that trip so much better because no one had their phones or their phones didn't work. So they were actually talking about how, like, I had a number of students who were like, I would never tell my parents this, but I'm kind of grateful they took away my phone because it was really nice. And I had this one young woman who told me, she had told me about how in the summer she was a lifeguard and she dropped her phone in the ocean. And she was traumatized, and she said that she was like really upset. It was an expensive phone, and she couldn't believe she had done this, and she didn't have money to buy another one. And her mother was not gonna help her, and blah, blah, blah. So she lost her phone, and she said that 24 hours went by, and said she was sitting in the lifeguard chair, like lifeguard, she was like watching the ocean, doing her job. And she said, and suddenly I just had this moment where everything just felt so clear. And it was like I came up out of a fog, and I thought, I'm in the world again. Like she was talking about how like it was like she came out of this like being underwater and suddenly she could see again. So students talked a lot about the relief of having their smartphones taken away for a while. And then I also had students who told me that they regularly, they try to manage their smartphone usage. And so they would tell me things like, here's the deal I have with myself is that when I leave the house, I leave my charger home, and when my phone dies, I don't use it anymore. Like, that's it. It's done for the day. Or students talked about how in order to get studying done, they would go, everybody knew where the dead spots were on campus, like for Wi-Fi, so they would go there to study. And so by the time I left every campus, I knew where all the dead spots were. And they talked also about how they would give their phone to their roommates and say, don't give this back to me until I finish this paper and hand it in. So people are trying to give themselves space from technology. The other thing that came up a lot was pseudonymous accounts. So accounts that were not attached to your real name. That this was everybody's favorite version of social media. Because this was the social media platforms or like their accounts that they could actually enjoy because they didn't have to perform. And everybody's favorite, at the time when I did a study, everybody's favorite app was Snapchat. And the reason why they loved it was because the posts disappear. So they're low stakes. And I know you can screenshot it. And everybody knows that you can screenshot it. But in general, students felt like Snapchat is the only place where we're allowed to laugh and be silly. Because you're not allowed to be silly in posts and pictures that interviewers might see. You can only be silly anonymously or like in a post that disappears. And so that was one of the reasons why people love Snapchat so much. So one of the things that came up a lot and which I want us to think about tonight, or I want you all to think about, is this differentiation that students made between being users of social media and smartphones versus being used by social media and smartphones. So they made this distinction, like think about that distinction. A lot of students said that they felt used by their devices, like they felt addicted to their devices, so like helpless in the face of them, and it made them feel used. And part of what like was behind the students leaving their chargers at home or giving their phone away to their roommate or going to find the dead spots was trying to be in a better position in relation to these devices or to social media. They wanted to feel in control of their devices as opposed to being used by them. And of course, one of the things we now know is that, the people behind the curtain, so people who are, creating smartphones and social media platforms, et cetera, they are actually trying to addict us. So they are actually thinking about how can we get people to use this more and more and more. I think one of the things I've thought a lot about is I think we need to be more compassionate with ourselves about our devices. I was talking about earlier, I asked you to think about what does a healthy relationship look like with social media, with your smartphone. And one of the things that happened when I did the survey was, I think it was something like 70% of students, it was about maybe 72% of students said that they tried to intentionally take breaks, or they try to like give their smartphone away sometimes so that they don't use it because it's so hard to put it down. So they were talking about how they really have to work hard to control their usage. They often felt really overwhelmed by it or addicted. And And so the general experience was like, I have a really hard time not grabbing this thing all the time, and this makes me feel upset. But then there was another percentage of students, it was something like 12% of students, who in their answer, and you can almost hear their voice, they were like, well, I don't need to worry about my smartphone usage because I have this thing called willpower. And so there was a sense of like, I am super powerful. Like people know, like people who do have a lot of willpower with their devices feel kind of superior about it because they know everyone around them is struggling. And it's made me think a lot about how, we have these devices that are designed to addict us. They can be really wonderful, but they can also control us or make us feel used. And I think we need to be, like, when the students were telling me about their tricks, like, I go to study in the library where there's no Wi-Fi, or I give my phone away to my roommate, or yours truly, I unplug the Wi-Fi in my apartment so I don't do online shopping. In some ways, I think we're like raised to think, well, that's a coping mechanism, so therefore that's bad. Like what I should really learn to do is just, have willpower over my device. And even though I could just go online shopping all I wanted or look at the houses, like I should just learn to stay away. And the fact that I need to unplug the Wi-Fi means that there's something wrong with me or I'm weak-willed. And I actually think that these things that we do, like give each other our phones or put them across the room. A lot of students talked about how if they put the phone across the room and they were lazy, like they wouldn't touch it. So they would try to put it far away so they couldn't touch it. Or some people have lock boxes for their phone. So they literally ask someone to lock it away. And I actually think that is us taking control. Like that is us having willpower over these devices. And I think we need to be nicer to ourselves about the different things that we're doing to try to have healthy relationships to our devices. So I will stop here with some questions for all of you. So how do we, in the words of one student, stop Facebook or social media or smartphones from using us? What does it mean that we are the products of social media? So we are the social media's products. Like we are the consumed. Like we are like the, they're advertising to us. Like we are performing, we're branding ourselves, right? So we are becoming the products of social media. And I'll end here. So what does a healthy relationship look like to social media and our smartphones? Is there such a thing? And I asked that last question because the very first university that I spoke at about this research after it was finished, I spoke to all the first year students at this university, and I was raising these different questions. And the first question that came up in the audience from a young woman who was a student, I left them with, what is a healthy relationship look like? And she answered with, what do you think if there is no such thing as a healthy relationship with you? What do you do? And there were all these nodding heads in the room. And I thought, whoa, okay, what about those of us who don't feel like they can have a healthy relationship? And she ended by saying, and what if your school is forcing you to be on it? And all the administrators in the room were like, So, because a lot of students now, depending on what position you have, if you have a student leadership position, often you have to tweet or you have to monitor a Facebook account. And one of the things that came up was, what if you know this is unhealthy for you, but then someone is making you do this? How do you survive? So, anyway, I will end there. I welcome your questions and would love to hear what you think.
Donna, thank you so much for a wonderful talk. We have some time for questions now, maybe 20 minutes or so. As always, there's the 3 rules that I always give, A, B, and C. A, please be articulate, so please wait for a microphone before you ask your question. B, and this is very important, please be brief. Make your question short and sweet. And C, please be centered. Focus on the issues that were raised this evening in the talk. So while I think about that question, I have a quick question for you because this is faith and global engagement. So I'm wondering how your own Christian faith guides or inspires this kind of research and some of the advice or the insights you're having here.
Well, so I think a lot about like that question I just asked about what does it mean that we are the products, or that social media is turning us into brands, right? Turning us into products. Just because generally the idea that we are products or objects is something that really conflicts with the social justice teachings that I subscribe to, and and just basic concepts about like human dignity and the value of the human person. But I think one of the things I've thought a lot about, so there's this there's this woman, Simone Weil. Has anybody heard of Simone Weil? She's an like early 20th century Christian thinker. Well, actually, she was Jewish, but she almost converted to Catholicism. But anyway, so I think she's really extraordinary, but she had this concept called creative attention. And it was based on the Good Samaritan. So for her, she felt like when there's real suffering, so if there's real suffering, the way that you begin to alleviate suffering is you pay attention. And so if you think about if you're walking down the street and you see a homeless person, for Simone Weil, the beginning of restoring the humanity to a person who is truly suffering is by looking them in the face and seeing them. Because for her, attention is the most basic acknowledgement of human dignity and human worth. And she talks a lot, in her work about suffering, she talks a lot about how suffering is the absence, it's the loss of a sense of humanity. So somehow, in order to begin to alleviate suffering, you have to restore the sense of humanity to that person. And for her, the first moment of that is the gaze. It's to look at that person. It's to see them. And as you know, I'm sure as many of you know, many of us, when we walk down the street, we don't look at homeless people. Like, we don't look at the people. We don't want to see them necessarily. So we won't look at them. And so for her, the reason why she talked about it is creative attention. It's literally creative. You can actually, it's a moment of grace. So the attention is creative because it has the power to restore our humanity. And so for Simone Weil, the most basic form of social justice work is being willing to look at another person in the face. And so one of the things I've thought a lot about as we walk around the world like this is, are we, think about that. If the most basic social justice act is looking at each other, and let's take away just the image of the homeless person for a second. Let's just think about the people who live around us. I'm sure all of you know, right? If you're having a bad day, and someone says to you, hey, how are you? And they really look at you, and they ask, they mean it. That can actually do something to you. It actually can make you feel like a person again, or it can remind you that someone sees me. And so I think about how, okay, if that's the most basic form of social justice practice, what does it mean that we're not practicing it anymore? What does it mean that we're looking at our devices but not each other? So
in a way, the question at the end is about how devices can be more humanizing in a way rather than dehumanizing. Since what you talked about basically is a kind of dehumanizing experience of social media.
Well, so because our devices get in the way of us seeing each other. So, but just something to think about. That doesn't mean you can't look at your phone, but I do think that human interaction is missing. And then I just think about how many of you, or I don't have a smartphone, and so I'm when I'm standing in line at Starbucks, I'm just standing in line looking around, and no one else is. They're all on their phones. And I specifically remember standing in line in New York, in Brooklyn, where I live, and watching. So there was this very attractive man in the line. There was an attractive man. So he's very, very attractive. He's kind of hot. And he was checking out this woman. And I was whoo. He was checking her out. And she's this. And I was lady, lady, you're missing out here. And so he's staring at her, and and then she just missed it. And I wanted to be lady, like the guy. So I mean, we're also missing out on those moments. You could be missing out on potential dates, so there's that too.
Okay, let that be a lesson to you. Anyway, questions, serious questions. Please raise your hand. Okay, there's a question here in the get microphone here. Lady.
Hi, Dr. Freitas. My name is Summer. I'm a Boston University student. Yeah, I know you teach here, so it's really good to see you here. Yeah, so I have two quick questions. Just a little bit background. The social media I use most are Facebook and WeChat. So from the social media posts I see every day are not just about happiness. So I have friends who complain a lot on their social media posts, and I have friends who sell stuff. Like 代购 on their WeChat moments, and some of them, just post something hilarious like a doggy video or something. So I wonder if you have a thought on that. And my second question is, how did you do your research or write a book without using the social media yourself? Thank you.
So something like WeChat or WhatsApp, or I think if it's more like group texting, that's very different. So the platforms where people are worried about appearing happy or like really present, almost like online CVs, are the ones attached to your real name that interviewers can find. That, or like one of the things that comes up a lot in the US is, in high school this comes up too, because it's widely known that admissions officers for like universities Google their applicants. And so, students are very aware that like what they're posting that's attached to their real name, like what's Googleable, et cetera, what an admissions officer can find can affect whether or not they get into Harvard. And so something like that is very different, or like that's why Snapchat is different. So students don't care what they put on Snapchat. I mean, within reason, because it could get screenshotted, but in general, they really seek out platforms where they can just kind of hang out with their friends as opposed to perform for everyone. And so a lot of people differentiated too between like Instagram and how honest they could be on Instagram versus Facebook versus Twitter. So they had like different criteria for different platforms depending on who would see it, and also always depending on whether or not it was attached to their name. So if they had some sort of handle that would hide them. So people really enjoyed any sort of account or any sort of opportunity to interact with their friends that no one else could see, or that was not easily accessible by someone working at Morgan Stanley that they wanted a job from. So, and then I would say, I don't know how I would write a book if I had a smartphone. I think it would be really hard because I would be on it all the time. So, I mean, I just think I would have a really hard time if I had a smartphone, which is why I don't have one. So this is me making a choice about technology in my life. And that was one of the things I wanted to bring up was I do think that often so many people feel powerless in the face of their devices, or we don't necessarily think about our usage of them. And part of what we do in college is we become critical thinkers, ideally, about the world, about everything in it. And I think we need to become critical thinkers about our smartphones, because the more we are thinking about them, thinking about how we use them, how it makes us feel, if it makes us feel good, bad, if it makes us feel empowered or disempowered, then we can begin to make choices around them and have a better relationship with them, because they're clearly here to stay. And I know that I'm really in the minority, perhaps the only person in Hong Kong that does not have a smartphone. So other than like maybe someone who's like 100, but I think we have to. They need to become choices as opposed to things that are just overpowering us or that we don't think about in the face of.
We should have another question, I think.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So you have a quick.
No, I didn't make my second question clear. I mean, you did a research on Facebook, on social media. You even use it.
Why did I? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I misunderstood. The reason why I did this research is because all the students I talked to had a lot of questions for each other about how other people felt, and they wanted to know. And because of my earlier research, I'm always sitting around with college students, like all over the country. And one of the things that was happening was I was going from place to place and everywhere I went, students were asking me questions like, do you know what other students feel about X, Y, and Z about social media? Do you know if students are struggling too, or like other students are struggling? And because I kept hearing these questions come up, I decided, okay, like someone's got to do this research, so I'm gonna do it. And I thought it was kind of funny that I don't have social media and I don't have a smartphone. But I don't think that that means I can't do the study. So these were the questions that students were asking, and so I wanted to ask them.
Thanks for your question. Okay, there's a question there, and there was another one. Yes, let's have the question there.
Thank you. Although you're dealing with students, I'm interested in if you just for interest as a sidebar thing, look at how some older non-students use social media. Just to use my case, I feel quite empowered by it because I use it as a visual diary. I subscribe to some really quite like New York Times, Atlantic, all these things, and I get teaching material from it. And I've also got jobs through pages from organisations, so I feel it's really useful to me. But I understand, but I still agree with you a lot for older people about not putting too much depressing stuff on the thing as well, because you think, oh, this might come across too bad, or whatever. But I think I'm actually pretty honest on the whole, because I feel like I'm not afraid of mentioning my thing. But I'm interested to see what other people from like over student age, how they feel about it. Have you got any ideas? You might have asked some friends.
Well, I mean, when I was doing the study, and then I would come home from a trip, and I would go meet my friends out for drinks. You know, we would talk. I'd be like, oh, like this is what the students were saying, and I actually had a lot of my friends were like, oh, I feel that way too, or like I feel like they felt the same kind of push and pull with their smartphones, like they love it, they hate it, kind of thing, or like I think. A lot of people can see the good of social media. So like I asked everybody, like, what was your favorite thing about what's your favorite thing about social media and smartphones? And the two top things were, I love looking at people's photos, but of course they also hate looking at people's photos. So there's that complicated thing. So, but they love looking at food. They love looking at all kinds of stuff. So pictures were fun, or getting to take lots of pictures. And then they loved the fact that they could talk to people who were far away. That was by far the number one thing. So they love the fact that like I can stay in touch with people. I studied abroad in Africa, and now I'm back here in the United States, and I can stay in touch with everyone I met so easily, and isn't that wonderful? So people had lots of really lots of things that they loved about social media, but it came with this big downside, which is this: I feel addicted, like I can't get away from it, I can't get any work done, like that sort of thing. So, but I have to say that like a lot of the adults feel similarly about their experience of like some of their frustration with it, or just in the United States we talk all the time about all the parents competing with their kid photos, like my kid is cuter than your kid kind of thing. And so there were all sorts of anxieties like on a different adult scale. I would say though that I think the older you get, the less you worry about getting a job, because unless you're career changing, like I think adults are in a different place with regard to the job market generally. And so there isn't this worry of, oh my gosh, what if I say the wrong thing and my interviewer sees me with a beer bottle in my picture and they think I'm a drunk, and I'm a drunk college student. Like, you're probably not worrying about that. So, because also you're allowed to drink, right? I'm guessing you're over 21. I don't know what the drinking age is here. So like a lot of students are worried about appearing in a way that would upset an interviewer or make an interviewer think less of them. And one of the things that was interesting about students that I interviewed was they thought, for the most part, that their parents were incredibly embarrassing on social media. So they complained about their parents' usage. And they would talk about how, like, I had to unfriend my mother because, like, she would post things on my Facebook page that were inappropriate. Or, like, she would say things, or I'd be like, Mom, stop talking about your dating life on Facebook. Like, that's embarrassing. Like, so they felt like their parents had no filter. And they were very much learning a filter, and so a lot of students talked about how they try to hide their parents, or they literally unfriend their parents or don't allow their parents to be friends with their friends, because that's the other thing. They were like, my mom decided she could friend all of my friends, and then I told them they had to unfriend her. So there was a lot of complaining about parent behavior.
Other questions? Yeah, there's a question there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Donna. It was really great. Your study was, what, five years ago now, right? Was 14?
It went through the beginning of 2016.
Okay, so it's, most recent than I thought. But
No, wait, 2015.
wasn't it 15?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it was
2015.
15. Anyway, I'm just thinking there's a lot that has been happening since then, especially regarding Facebook, you know, the whole Cambridge Analytica
Yes.
thing. And since then, there's like a huge get out of Facebook movement. And, you know, I'm kind of thinking we're kind of in the early days of social media. It's been like 10 years. And I'm kind of wondering, what is your vision of social media, let's say in 10, 20 years time? Because you just said, you know, they will be there. They're not going to just disappear. But they might change, or we might change, or government might take a little bit more of control. I'm wondering if you have this kind of vision of the future of social media.
I think that's a great question. I mean, I have students in the United States, for the most part, really hate Facebook. They did back when I was doing the interviews, because they felt like it was an obligation. They felt like Facebook was so ubiquitous, and because so many adults are on it, this was part of the, like, I have to have a Facebook presence because interviewers need to be able to find me there, or like certain people in power or in my life need to find me there, or grandma needs to find me there because grandma's on Facebook. But they definitely felt like Facebook is not this is not fun for me. Like, it's just an obligation. And what I wonder, I guess, is, you know, we're going to have to find a way, I think, to mitigate, you know, people's frustration with social media. Like, so when it started back in the day, so I was actually, I used to be on Facebook way long ago. Gosh, like shortly after Mark Zuckerberg invented it, because I was working at one of the schools when Facebook, I don't know if you know this, but when Facebook started, when he started it, what happened was it went from school to school. So universities started getting Facebook. And, you know, it came to my school, and my students told me about it. And at the time, the very early version of Facebook was just for your college. So you couldn't connect to another college, but you could connect to everybody at your school. And so my students were like, Professor Freitas, you gotta see this thing. You gotta get an account. So, and I could, because you had to have a .edu address from that school. That's how it worked. And so I created an account, and then I wished I could uncreate it immediately, because Facebook back then was a free-for-all. Like, it was things I wish I could unsee of my students. Like, so students like doing cake stands at parties, and students smoking joints and doing drugs and like I saw more than I ever wanted to see of my students in their party lives. And it was just, and everything was open. You didn't have to friend anybody. You could see it all. And so in the early days of Facebook, people posted everything. People went wild. And then as Facebook grew, and as, you know, colleges got connected, and, you know, and then suddenly, like, you had to friend somebody to see their pages. Like, nobody knew it. Like, nobody knew how to make their page private back then. Then the way people posted changed. And so originally, it really was social for my students. It was kind of crazy. Like, it was kind of a wild place to be social. And there was flirting. There was, like, all kinds of things going on. And definitely stuff, like, you know, and I was a professor. And, you know, when I'm thinking about, you know, all the students are talking, they're worried about their interviewers seeing this stuff. And after I saw the stuff, I was like, oh, I should not be seeing this. Like, it is inappropriate for me, the professor, to be on this thing. Like, I felt like I was invading my students' privacy. And so, you know, I think the students I interviewed would enjoy social media more maybe not if they could do keg stands and smoke joints and pictures, but like if they could be more honest about themselves, if they could have more fun. Like part of why they love Snapchat so much was they felt like they could have fun. And, you know, I think we need to think about how do we differentiate platforms? Are certain platforms gonna be professional, period? Are certain platforms gonna be social, period? Are we going to develop a sense of when is it inappropriate for an interviewer to go on someone's like social profile? Because I don't think that we're asking that question, right? Like, I don't think we've asked about the ethics of what we're viewing. So you have college admissions officers in the United States who are going on people's pages to check out applicants. But is it ethical for them to do that? Is it ethical for them to go search something that originally is supposed to be just social? Is it ethical for interviewers to be going on someone's Twitter account? Like, should that be the means that we're using to judge someone? Or do we have to develop a sense of privacy? And I always think about how, like, I know when I was a kid, my mother was very adamant about the fact that she gave me a diary and she was like, you can put whatever you want in this and it's your diary. And it didn't have a lock on it or anything, but she was like, I will never look in it. And maybe she did, I don't know, when I was not around. But I really trusted her to not look in it. She told me that, and I trusted her, and I put whatever I wanted in the diary, and I left it around. I didn't like hide it from her because I believed her. And, you know, I think about how, in a lot of ways, I feel like some of what we're posting online, we're treating our profiles, or maybe we should be able to treat our profiles with our friends or our communications with our friends kind of like a diary, right? Like we want to expect that mom's not going to go check it out because we need a private space. But right now, or we should believe that admissions officers are not going to go peek in our diaries. And I don't think we've really asked ourselves as a culture about etiquette, you know, or the ethics of what should we be viewing, what should be off limits, you know, in certain circumstances. And I think that's one of the things we have to figure out. And then, of course, the big one is the truth issue, right? Because, like, I mean, before we had the, like, Russia controlling the American election, et cetera, all of my students were like, everything's fake, everything's fake, everything's fake, like fake news, essentially. And they were saying that years ago. And they hated that. They were frustrated because they felt everybody's lying online all the time. So I know it's not true, but I still can't stop looking at it. And but so, I mean, I think that's just an ongoing question, and I don't know how we figure that out.
Right. I think, okay, we have one last question, very short one, and a short answer. Okay, over here.
Thanks so much for your talk. Quick question. I was wondering if you could develop your understanding of happiness more and whether it relates to your understanding of social justice, particularly Simone Weil's.
What is my sense of happiness? So my sense specifically?
Yeah, your understanding of it.
Oh, I don't know.
Short
I have a
question,
definition.
short answer.
I don't know. I guess for me, it has to do with just a sense of well-being in my life and in my relationships. And I thought a lot about earlier, Grace and I were talking about the peace and the pleasure we feel when we're able to focus or concentrate, like say on just a book, like reading a book, and to not be distracted and wanting to grab something all the time. And so I think in many ways, in its simplest form, it's that kind of self-possession or that peace in oneself, where you're just able to be in the spot that you are, and you're able to be alone and be okay, to not need to fill up your mind with something to distract yourself from your thoughts. I think you're able to pay attention to the world. I spent last semester with my students. We read all these writers who were great attenders of the world, who paid attention to the world in this really extraordinary way. We read Thoreau, we read E.B. White, we read Emily Dickinson, and because I wanted my students to think about the pleasures and the importance of attention, because I think attention, you know, that's what Simone Weil is talking about. Attention is part of what connects us. It's part of what can make our life good, or part of what can make the life of someone else better. And so I think for me, those are the things that I associate with happiness. So thank you for that question. And thank you all for coming tonight.
Donna Freitas, thank you so much. It was a wonderful time. Thank you. It was brilliant. Thank you.